Hello, this is Taylor Elwood with Magical Experiments, and I'm thrilled to welcome to the Magical Experiments podcast Dr. H of Regulus Astrology. Dr. H, please take a moment and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast, Taylor. Dr. H is my pseudonym because I am still kind of working for private clients under non-disclosure agreements, and that's how they prefer I present myself to the world. I've been a practicing traditional astrologer since 2005 when I began to study with Robert Zoller, who was one of the leading individuals involved in the recovery of traditional astrology in the early 20s. Traditional astrology is, let's call it astrology before modern planets, astrology before the scientific revolution, astrology pre-1600. And what distinguishes my practice from a lot of other folks, first of all, I only have a handful of clients. I don't actively solicit clients. This gives me a lot of time to research topics in depth at a scale which a lot of people just don't have time to do. And so my Substack, Regulus Astrology, it's actually regulus-astrology.com, or you can look up the name of the Substack, House of Wisdom, has a lot of this custom astrology research on it. And some of that is going to be very applicable to magicians in terms of my current project, which is understanding the moon quite a bit more in depth. So that's a little bit about what I do, and the rest will have to be a mystery for now.
All right. Well, we're gonna unpack some of that mystery. Before we get into that, I noticed a few people joined us live, so I just want to take a moment and greet them. Welcome, Christy. Welcome, Thyan. Glad to have you here. If you have questions or comments as we're talking, please feel free to drop those into the live, and we'll be happy to answer them. Welcome, Sheena, as well. I'm happy to have all of you here. So Dr. H, first of all, glad to have you here. And I'm really fascinated with the astrology of the moon. That's kind of what we're talking about today here in part. So I think a lot of times, when people think of astrology, they think of like fortune telling. They might think of, and from a magical perspective, they may think of, okay, like which planets do I work with? When do I work with them? The cycles. But I don't know that the moon is always thought of in the same way. So let's talk a little bit about your research into the moon. What drew you into researching that, and how does the moon interface with the other astrological influences that are out there when it comes to practical magic work?
That's a great question, Taylor. I would say that many times the basic understanding of astrology is what's your sun sign. Then people will get into what's their moon sign, and then maybe their rising sign. A lot of times you go to astrology conferences and people will write those three things on their name tag, sometimes called the big three. I would say that if you look at astrology, you have to categorize it into four different areas. There's mundane astrology, astrology of the world. There's natal astrology, astrology of each of us. There's something called electional astrology, which is how to choose an event to try to get an outcome that you want, which has, of the four branches, the most application to ritual. And then there is horary astrology, which is trying to answer a question based on a chart composed at the time the question is asked. Now, it turns out that for the moon, in the way the astrology is taught, the moon is the most important planet for horary and electional astrology, less so for natal astrology. But my teacher, Robert Zoller, pointed out that the moon's configuration in one's natal chart is just as important as it's found in horary or electional astrology. Specifically, the planet the moon separates from is something in the past, and the planet the moon applies to is something in the future. And that's especially true for horary or electional astrology. Now, it turns out natal astrology is a little bit different. Planets that the moon separates from tend to mean things that you deal with early in your life. And then when you get later in your life, you're more focused on the things the planets up or the moon applies to. So that's one of the big interests of the moon to me. And specifically as it relates to magic, if you're trying to have some kind of ritual, generally you can boil it down to a theme of either Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, or Saturn. Mercury would be learning, writing, or communication. Venus would be love, art, pleasure, relationships. Mars would be, let's say, getting ready for an athletic competition, energy, courage, or combat. Jupiter would be expansion, luck, wisdom, and Saturn would be discipline, structure, or protection. So if one of those, if you can assign the intent of your ritual to one of those planets, then if you want to get better timing and better outcome for your ritual, you want the moon to apply to one of those 5 planets which match the theme of your ritual. So that's how I would start with it and why the moon is so important. I mean, for instance, if you want to, if you want to like get into or deepen a relationship, you would ideally want the moon applying to Venus. If you don't know what you're doing and you're doing it on a day that the moon applies to Saturn, it's probably not going to be a very effective ritual because Saturn is more associated with like having a breakup or having a roadblock that you have to overcome. So that's one level of application to magic, defining the planet which matches the theme of your ritual, and then having the moon apply to that planet to confirm that theme in your ritual practice.
Okay, so I have
Okay.
a couple questions now. This is like prompted some very interesting
Sure.
thought. How important is the planetary hour and or planetary day in this system of magic? So for example, like today being Friday is quote unquote Venus Day, right?
Right.
Tomorrow being Saturday, it's going to be Saturn Day. Like, do the days matter as much? Is it more along the lines of, okay, I'm going to check the astrological hour as well. So I'm doing this ritual working and I'm going to pick, and I want to pick the hour of Venus. But I also want to work with the moon. Like, how relevant is that aspect to this?
Okay. Well, in a perfect world, and if you had a perfect chart, of which none of those are true, you would be the moon would be applying to Venus, and you do it on a Venus day and a Venus hour, and Venus would be really in a good sign, and this, that, and the other. In reality, you can't do that. Okay, so the way I would break this down is there is a kind of a beginning level of astrology for magical work, and then there's a more advanced uh, style of magic where you're really trying to get a specific outcome. Now, the way I like to talk about planetary hours and days is for routine ritual work. You want, I'll give you an example. My Substack posts once a week an article on a specific individual historical figure. I talk about the moon's configuration. Now, because this is communication, I sent it out on Wednesday, which is a Mercury day. And this week, I actually sent it out on the Mercury day and the Mercury hour, which happened to be 7:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So for the best way of handling planetary days and hours in your life, irrespective of a specific ritual you're working on, is to try to understand the basic themes. Like, for instance, like going to the gym. Okay, Tuesday is Mars Day, and Jupiter is Thursday is Jupiter's day. Okay, if you're going to go to the gym and you're going to like work out with a trainer, okay, you do that on a Tuesday or Thursday, and you will get better results like day in, day out, like cumulatively over a period of a year or two. You will get better results if you go to the gym and work with a trainer on especially Tuesday, but Thursday's not bad. Than you will if you do it on especially on a Friday, which is Venus Day, which is what you're thinking about, what you're gonna do Friday night, eating, going out, partying, and whatnot. So and the thing which planetary days and hours is really helpful for are for magicians who are beginning the practice who don't have a lot of background in astrology, because to really get the event timing, it can get quite complicated. So everybody can find with simple, online programs. A lot of them are free. The planetary day and planetary hour for kind of regular routine stuff. And if you're, if you're dealing with kind of like, you know, you're not focused on, oh my God, I have to do this. I mean, this is a ritual for a very, very specific event that I really want to have this outcome. That requires a whole deeper level of understanding of astrology. But if you're doing kind of a routine ritual and it's not like, life or death kind of thing, use the planetary days and hours to kind of step into it. That's what I would say.
Okay. I want to welcome Hero, who just joined us as well. And again, for those of you who are live, if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop those in at any time. I'm happy to relay them into the interview itself. Next question I have is, how important is the phase of the moon with the magical working? So, like new moon, for example, or full moon or something like that. So if I'm doing like a love magic working as an example, should I be doing it during the full moon? Should I be doing it during the new moon? Now I have my own thoughts on this, but I'm curious as to what your ideas are.
There are two parts to this. Okay. One is the timing. Do you want something to happen soon, or do you want something to happen? It's okay if it happens a little bit later. If you want things to happen soon, you want to do it between the new moon and the full moon when the moon is waxing.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do something later, or something that might take a long time to kind of work out because it's complicated, then you're going to want to do that between the full moon and the new moon during the waning moon. Now, within natal astrology, there is a technique which my teacher Robert Zoller proposed, and which I am testing on my site with my research work for natal astrology, which again is a little different application of astrology than what we're talking about for ritual work. But people who are born with a new moon, or between a new moon and a full moon, the bulk of their life's promise in terms of the major themes of what they're set out to do will occur between, age 0 and the midpoint of their lifespan. The early bloomer is the best way to think of it. People born on the waning phase of the moon, between a full moon or new moon, they tend to be late bloomers. They may not even know what they're doing, or they may not really make their mark until after the midpoint of their life. So that's the first way I would answer your question, is that if you want to happen soon, do it between a new moon and a full moon. If you want to happen later, or if the ritual by design is going to take a long time to do it between the full moon and the new moon. Now, there's a part two to your answer, or to your question, rather. A lot of, I see this a lot on Substack. There's a lot of rookie witches out there to say, okay, I want to set the intention on the new moon. And traditional astrologers are really pretty specific on this. The new moon, the exact time of the new moon is too early, because the moon is close to the sun. There's a condition that's called combust. Because the moon moves about 14 degrees a day, you want to at least wait 1 day or 2 days after the exact new moon before you set your intention. And the same thing goes for the full moon. You would never want to do something exactly on a full moon. I would recommend waiting at least 1 or 2 days after a full moon. Now, why? Okay. The traditional guidelines for problems with a new moon, and this is really from natal astrology, but the same things apply for ritual work, is that, when a planet, the moon or any other planet, is very close to the sun, it's combust, which means its light is blotted out by the sun. Now, empirically, what happens in real life is that means that people can have clouded judgment, or their vision is only partial, They can have a lot of emotional reserve. They can be vulnerable to withdrawing from the world. And some authors, like the Roman astrological author Firmicus Maternus, indicate it can signify blindness and destruction. Now, if I were to give you two examples from natal astrology to show you how that plays out in somebody's life, J.D. Salinger is an example of that. He is the author of the book Catcher in the Rye. And that was he wrote other books, but that was the book that made him one of the most famous authors in America in the 1950s. And he didn't want that fame. He became a recluse that you couldn't even find him. I mean, you couldn't even send him a letter or anything. And he refused to be engaged with the public at all. So he's a good example of somebody where the new moon birth signified this emotional repression. There are others out there, but he's an example of what a new moon birth does to somebody's life. So if you're doing a ritual, it means that your moon, your emotions, what you're trying to do, intuitively is going to be really challenged and not work out well. So it's okay, the idea, you want to do something in a new moon to set the cycle of the whole lunation cycle, but wait 2 days is my recommendation.
Okay. A couple of things here. First, that Sheena asked, do you take into account when the moon is void, of course, which I think we just answered. If so, how does it influence your magical planning? So I think you've answered that question right there. But I wanted to acknowledge the question was asked.
I have a good 2 or 3 good examples of that. Let's maybe just do one and then see what we want to keep talking about.
Sure.
Okay, so what is void of course? Void of course, let's say, each sign has 30 degrees in it. Okay. So let's say that, and I'm pulling up a specific example here. I'll tell you who it is when I'm done. Let's say the moon is at 11 Libra. Okay. And you have Saturn at 27 Libra. Now, the difference in degrees is 16 degrees of Libra. Now, even though that's still in Libra, the Saturn, the actual technical definition of void of course that I use, and I'm testing it, it's testing out very well, is what the Renaissance astrologer William Lilly uses in his book Christian Astrology. He is the leading horary astrologer in our tradition, and many horary astrologer teachers, primarily based in the UK, use Christian astrology. We're not going to get into the degrees, but this is 16 degrees between the moon and Saturn is what he would call void of course. So what void of course means is it takes a long time for something to happen. There is a liminal period where something actually may stop. Like if a ship is at sea, the winds stop. It does not necessarily mean that things will not come to fruition, but it may mean that things take a while, that there has to be a pause before they come to fruition. So this ties into your earlier question of, if you want things to go fast and speedy, you don't want a void of course. But, there is no perfect choice. There's no perfect chart. So if you happen to have a void of course in there, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just may take some time. Now, the example I gave you just now is from the horoscope of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who was an English Victorian poet. Now, she had a very unusual situation that she had a lot of siblings, and her father was very patriarchal. And he forbid any of his children, her included, to be married. And if they got married, he would cut them off of their inheritance and never talk to them again. Okay. So she fell madly in love, and she did get married, but she did lose her inheritance. And this is one of the posts in my Substack, House of Wisdom. You can read more about it. But here's how the void, of course, applied in her chart. Okay. The moon applies to Saturn. Saturn would be the influence of her father trying to say no to the marriage. But because there was a void of course condition in there, she had enough time, okay, in this liminal period to scheme with Robert Browning to escape, elope, and have a marriage and basically leave the country. So the void of course moon in this chart meant that it didn't prevent her from getting married, but it did prolong the time until she could figure out how to get married. And it did claw out her inheritance. So that's an example of one of the ways that I see the void of course occurring in a horoscope.
Mm, that's really fascinating. I want to welcome Hans, Greta, Cloudy, Zen, and Glenn. Thank you for joining. Again, if any of you have questions or comments as we're going throughout, please feel free to drop those in. We love having you here, and I love having people interact and share their questions and thoughts. I'm finding this interview really fascinating. You're sharing a lot of interesting things. One thing that kind of occurs to me, like with the new moon, from a magical perspective too, is like it can actually be a good time to bring a magical working to a close because it's like there's a closing, there's an ending right there. I do a lot of long-term magical workings myself, and so one of the things that I always kind of keep in mind is like, well, when do I want to bring this to a close? When does it naturally make sense to do that? And so my own work with the new moon is never really using it for beginnings, unless I'm, like you said, waiting a couple days later, but actually using it for closing down, bringing things to an end as a way of kind of like allowing it to wrap up and fully release out into the world because now it's closed off and there you go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, especially in the fourth quarter waning phase of the moon, where, if you just think about what that means, like looking at the sky, it means the moon has less and less light. And since the moon is the closest planet to the Earth, and the moon signifies the most movable planet that we have, if you're trying to end something and you see the light going out of the moon, it's time to literally turn out the lights on the project or the ritual that you're working on. So that makes total sense to me.
You mentioned for natal astrology, horary astrology, one other. Have you also done any work with sidereal astrology? And if so, like how does that factor into this?
Okay, so sidereal astrology is not really a type of astrology. It's a
Mhm.
different assumption, which would be common to all four branches of astrology.
Okay.
So sidereal astrology is based on the um, it's more rooted in the constellations, and it's a fixed horoscope in the sky which doesn't change. There's something called precession, which means that every 72 years, the position of our tropical zodiac shifts about 1 degree with respect to the fixed stars. It's kind of a technical point. The two things I would answer to you that would make sense to your audience. First of all, use a tropical zodiac or you use a sidereal. You don't use both. You got to pick a
Okay.
system and stick with it. Okay. And whatever you're doing, don't say, oh, well, let me bring this over. No, 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 no. It's either one or the other. And if you're going to do that, once you make that decision, study with people who use that school exclusively, or else it's going to be a big problem. Now, how do I draw in, having said that, and using the tropical system to define, what degree of the zodiac a planet is in? I do bring in an element of sidereal um, astrology that recognizes the positions of the fixed stars in the constellations. So, we have a fixed star in a constellation. Let's say the star Regulus, which is the name of my the name of my website, because in my natal chart I have Mars conjunct Regulus, and when I was born, that was around 28 degrees of Leo. Now, because of precession, it's almost a Virgo. In fact, I think it is a Virgo right now. But I use, in terms of when I see fixed stars aligning with planets that I'm working with, I do use the constellational symbolism of that star in terms of how it's working, and that is based on its sidereal placement. So that's the way I honor the sidereal zodiac, is that the energy of the fixed stars, which are closely tied to the sidereal zodiac, I use those same definitions of the stars in my practice. But I look at the current tropical position of that fixed star, not the sidereal position.
Okay. Welcome, Alejandro. Glad to have you here again. Anyone, if you have questions or comments, drop them in. Feel free to also heart this interview if you're enjoying it. You're getting a lot out of it. This is a really amazing and fascinating topic to explore. I always love bringing people on, such as Dr. H, because, there's so many different perspectives and ideas about magic out there. And getting the opportunity to learn from somebody who is a scholar and is doing some interesting magical experiments is absolutely a privilege and a joy. So I'm curious about another thing here. You mentioned that you do traditional astrology. Sometimes people like working with those pesky outer planets. What's your thought on that as it relates to what you're doing here? And should people be factoring those in as influences, particularly like with the moon work? Or is that just something where it's like, yeah, you don't even need to worry about that because Saturn's got you covered?
Okay, so I'm a traditional astrologer because I found that it works. And I don't mean to be flippant, but a lot of what happened in the history of astrology is that the techniques of traditional astrology, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, these have mostly been recovered in the last 30 years, since the mid 1990s. So, I mean, way back to like Linda Goodman's Sun Sign book in the 1960s, they didn't know, she or anybody else didn't know about any of these things. And as we have translated these historical texts from the even Babylonian, Greek, and Arabic periods, we're learning the richness of the tradition based on just Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the Sun, and that's it. So most people that use traditional astrology get better results with prediction. And I would say this because I know some traditional astrologers that use modern planets. If you're learning a technique, try it with traditional planets only and try it 200 times. And if it's not working for you, then try adding some modern planets and see where it gets you. I don't do it. And the other reason, and there are two other reasons which are more specific as opposed to, well, I'm a traditionalist and I don't use modern planets because I don't like them. It really doesn't matter what I like or what I don't like. Modern planets do not rule signs. I mean, yes, you can read that Neptune rules Pisces and this, that, and the other. That is a modernism, and that is false. When you actually test things, they do not rule signs, they do not rule time. And because I'm interested in prediction, I want to know what the time lords are. And the modern planets are not time lords, so I'm not really interested in them. Now, the
Okay.
second thing, one of the, we get, Pluto is a higher octave of Mars and all this kind of nonsense. Part of the problem, and this is what any skeptic would tell you about modern planets, is that it's hard to figure out what they are because oftentimes they include as a part of their symbolism two contrary factors. For instance, Pluto has said it's a sign of like, death and resurrection. Well, which is it? These are two very different things. One's like death, one's birth or rebirth, like the phoenix. So you're trying to mash two archetypes in one planet. In the case of Neptune, you have vision and you have delusion. Well, which is it? It can't be both, but people say it's both all the time. It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, Uranus can be said to be accidents, but it can be said to be quirky pieces of brilliance in terms of invention. So which is it? If I have Uranus in a certain house, am I going to have an accident? or am I going to become a brilliant inventor? You see, they try, the modern astrologers and people who use modern planets, they put too many delineations of the planet under that planet's moniker, and it's not internally consistent. And the last thing I will say, to answer to your question, the planet Uranus, I do find at times events fairly accurately, but you don't know exactly what the event is. But usually in predictive work, it can time things. But because I can't say what it is, I don't really use it. But sometimes I'm aware of, and I in my book, A Rectification Manual, I show how for President Gerald Ford, Uranus in the 10th house of his horoscope of career and profession, the transit of Uranus did time when he was unexpectedly appointed to vice president and when he unexpectedly rose to the office of presidency after Nixon resigned. And there's some very exact measurements for that using Uranus and without recurring to or without recourse to any other technique. So it can time things, but what it's going to be, don't know.
That's a really it's a really good point. Like, when people come up with like kind of arbitrary, if you will, correlations or correspondences, I always kind of want to know, well, where did that come from? I am in favor of developing personal correspondences because I think, as you work a given magical system, you are going to inevitably personalize some things. But then it's a question of, but then it's all like what I always like to say to people is like, remember that just because it makes sense to you and it's your personal correspondence and it gets you results doesn't mean it's a one size fits all kind of approach. So we have another question here from Sheena. She said, can you share some thoughts on the astrology of eclipses and magic? There are a lot of myths and taboos and rules about what magic should or shouldn't be done during these events.
Okay, so eclipses are by definition new moons and full moons, but they happen to occur close enough um, to the lunar nodes that the actual light of the sun or the moon is diminished depending on where on Earth you're looking at them. Eclipses are tricky. I've done a lot of work, proprietary work on timing them. I would say that you can do things on eclipses, but you got to know your shit. Okay, you really got to know what you're doing, because if you're a rookie and you're a little bit off, they can really slam you, because eclipses can be quite powerful. And just as one example, like in mundane astrology, and I'm not saying, and I can almost assure you they did not, but the second Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, project, Operation Iraqi Freedom, which was that big firefight in Baghdad in January, I think 15th or 16th of 1991, where we saw General Schwarzkopf, standing by video monitors and showing the bombs going down chimneys and whatnot. That occurred exactly on a solar eclipse, okay? Like almost to the freaking minute. And that was very destructive for the city of Baghdad. That's an example of the power of these eclipses. And if if you don't know exactly what you're doing, that effect could be like, blowing back on you. So I'm hesitant to advise using eclipses, partly because eclipses tend to introduce new factors and new forces. And even my teacher, Robert Zoller, said new spirits into the world, which are not, sometimes we've never worked with them before because they're just showing up for the first time. I mean, he actually waved his hands during a workshop and said during a solar eclipse, when the light of the sun is blocked out, it means that there are literally spiritual disembodied entities behind the sun, which can like fly forward through the eclipse point, which is like a hole in the zodiac, and and, and impact things on Earth. So you're dealing with a new class of a new type of energy, possibly linked to new types of beings, which are unpredictable. And so you're dealing with you're dealing with powerful forces that are very difficult to harness, even if you're very experienced in the field.
Mm. I want to welcome Satava, Joe, and Noctua. Thank you for coming on. And for all of you who are on here, if you have questions or comments, again, feel free to add those. We're going to talk about that ring in just a moment. I wanted to make an observation about eclipse magic because I've definitely done some eclipse magic and I've seen some stuff go sideways. And I think that was like a really valuable lesson for me. And hey, we all have to have our lessons, right? But I think that one of the things that I've come to realize in regards to eclipse work is that maybe the best thing you can do is just sit it out and actually use it as a time of reflection. Reflect on where you're at, reflect on where you've been. There is a real power in knowing when to rest and regenerate. And I actually think of eclipses as like a perfect opportunity to do that in what sense? It's time to rest and reflect. We don't have to tap into that stuff if we don't want to. I agree that you definitely want to know what you're doing. But you did hold your ring out, so tell us a little bit about that and the relationship between gems and crystals and astrological magic.
One of the first things, if you're interested in astrology as a magician, is to understand what your ruling planet is. And this is called a lot of things by a lot of people. I use Benjamin Dyke's terminology. He's a practicing magician and traditional astrologer in Minneapolis. And he wrote a book on this topic called The Search for the Search of the Heart. And he refers to it as the victor of the horoscope, the victor, Victor. It's one of 5 planets. It's either Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, or Saturn. One of those 5 planets will be the ruling planet of your horoscope. And for you to understand that is a better way for you to understand yourself and to understand what planetary energy you primarily exhibit and can work with. Now, the reason why I have this ring on, okay, this is a remedy for Mercury. The stone is emerald, and it is set in what's called an open back setting. This is a type of astrological remedy, and I want to show this up to the screen. You see that you can see the picture of the stone or the image of the stone on the back. So when you wear the ring, the actual gem touches the skin. Now, this is a style of remedy which is primarily practiced by Indian astrologers. We can call it Vedic astrology or Jyotish. You can actually get into a 3-hour debate on which of those 2 words is you're supposed to use. But the bottom line is that for gemstones, there are gemstone remedies to strengthen a particular planet. Now, I'm not a Mercury person. I'm actually a Jupiterian person, but Mercury for everybody, whether I'm Mercury or not, Mercury signifies rational thought and the brain. So if I want to strengthen that, because I do have an afflicted Mercury in my horoscope, I wear this and it helps calm me down. You can search if you're, and this is basically, I think, beginning magicians and working with gemstones, you should understand the correlation between gemstones and planets. And you can search online, just search up Vedic gemstone remedies, jewelry and astrology. You'll come up with things like the sun is assigned to rubies, the moon is to pearls, Mars is to red coral, Mercury is to emeralds, Jupiter is to yellow sapphires, Saturn is to blue sapphires, and Venus is to diamonds. And of course, some of those things like diamonds can be pricey, although diamond prices have come down a lot lately, much to the disappointment of De Beers because of the synthetic diamonds. But these sites will also give you cheaper gemstone remedies if you can't buy that one, which also work well with that planet. So, point being, understanding the victor of the horoscope, who you are. As a magician, you can strengthen your skills, your stature, if you wear a gemstone which corresponds to your ruling planet. There are exceptions, like Mercury is everybody, even though you're not a Mercury person necessarily, everybody has a mind. Emerald will help anybody's mind, and the moon is assigned to pearls. You want to get better intuition? It's not going to hurt anybody to wear a set of pearls. Okay, when you really need to have the moon strengthened, then you can also get a piece of pearl made into a ring, a jewelry, and put it on your pinky finger. And there are rules for which planets to which fingers. And just for entertainment, I do have one of these guys in my office, and you'll see Mercury's on the pinky finger. The fourth finger, Apollo, that's the sun, and third finger is Saturn, and second finger is Jupiter. So you'll see these correspondences quite a lot of places. So that's an example of astrological magic using gemstones that people can use as a routine part of their daily lives without trying to get into electing events, which you would do if you were going to do a talisman. And I can also talk about talismans too briefly if you want to get into that.
Well, in a moment. Cloudy said, "I'm wearing a Labradorite one. I haven't checked it astrologically. I'm guessing it's a bit mercurial, though."
I'm not an expert on all the stones. I would just go to your AI or Chat GPT or even Google search and say, just type in which astrological planet best corresponds to fill in the blank, the name of your gemstone, and see what comes up as a starting point. So I'm
Okay.
sorry I don't have a specific answer for you, but that's what I would do.
Okay. Yeah. No, good advice there. Welcome, Lisa. Glad to have you here. So let's talk a little bit about talismans. I see that you're wearing one around your neck there.
Okay, so talismans are an example of event-based astrology, the type that, we could turn it up here. This is the front of it. Well, actually, I don't know which side is front or back. And this is the reverse. Talismans are not necessarily things worn around your neck, but they could be. I actually went to a workshop teaching talismans that we made a talisman actually on a piece of paper, which people carried around in their wallet for a while. But what distinguishes a talisman from, let's say, a ring is that the talisman is something which is created, and in this case, inscribed at a specific event time, which is an elected time, an example of electional astrology, which is designed for a specific objective. Now, this is a Jupiter talisman, and this particular talisman is described in the literature. In fact, if you look up, you can Google search Jupiter talisman and Joseph Smith. If his name is not familiar to you, he was a ceremonial magician and founder of the Mormon faith. And this is actually a copy of the talisman that he wore. And there are rules for that. Other people created the Jupiter talisman. When people found this on him, they didn't really know what it was, but it's actually a Jupiter talisman. And this particular Jupiter talisman was created by the ceremonial magician Christopher Warnock, whose URL is renaissanceastrology.com. Now, he is perhaps the leading ceremonial astrological magician in North America, although there's more younger people that he's trained, which there's a lot more people out there right now. And he sells these talismans. He and his team created this talisman. You can buy it on his website. If you look at his website, he will list the talismans available for sale. He will show you the electional horoscope. He will give you the theme. In other words, the chart for the moment the talisman was created, and he'll explain the meaning, the basic theme behind the talisman. So I would say it's a more sophisticated way, a more precise way, as opposed to working with a gemstone astrology to get let's say I could get, for instance, a pendant. I could get a Mercury pendant, and if I like the electional chart cast for the moment that talisman was created from Mercury, I could wear that as well if I wanted to. Now, this is for wealth and prosperity, and I've made well over $1 million since I've been wearing this, for 10 years now, and so it's worked very well. The main thing, if you're interested in talismans, because again, it requires quite a bit of talent to create that. You can just search online for astrology and talismans online and see what comes up. I'm not going to, besides Christopher Warnock, who I purchased this from, I'm not going to recommend any other people because I don't know these people. But if you search, be sure that if you shopping for a talisman, that you can see the electional chart for the time it was created. Otherwise, you're just getting themed jewelry and not necessarily a real talisman. Okay. And there are other people besides Christopher Warnock who do create these things and are out there, probably some of his students as well. But that's the basic idea of a talisman.
Okay. I've got another question for you here. Can you use Saturn as an example of how a chart ruler can influence a life? Magically, is it best to work with the chart ruler, amplify it, or try to mediate its influence?
Let me give an example of a Saturn person. I'm trying to remember the guy's right name right now. Okay, Frederick Taylor. The ruler of his horoscope was Saturn and Gemini. Now, in his life, he was, and when you try to translate Saturn and Gemini into words, one of the ways you can do that is Saturn is science and Gemini is management. Scientific management was what he did. This was the famous time and motion studies on factory floors that were conducted in the early 20th century. There is regulation, there's precision, and there is a harshness to it because as a part of trying to beat his times, it's like feeling like you're a rat running a treadmill in an Amazon warehouse trying to get from point A to B to get the items off the shelf. That's a Saturn and Gemini thing. So that's an example and he did yield a lot of improvements to production times and output in factories with his style. Of course, that's all he knew. So, you take one thing and you push it far and you're going to drive people nuts, because like in Amazon warehouse, they talk about people can't even go to the bathroom. They have to carry a cup around so they can pee in it. This is some of the issues that involve with the harshness, command and control of Saturn. Um, so, um, it's one thing to have your own chart ruler Saturn. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are restrained to only conduct Saturn type rituals. It will always mean though that you bring a Saturnine type energy to the ritual you're conducting. And this is one of the things that if you're new to this, and this would be good to explore. This is the other book by Ben Dykes, co-authored with Jane Gibson, Astrological Magic, which I would recommend people new to astrological magic pick up. It talks about very specific rituals, starting with the elements, then the signs, and then the planets. For people who are used to conduct rituals, and he gives like the exact ritual, exactly what you say, where you stand, what you're looking, how you set up the altar. If you want to tap in this case, to your Saturnine victor of the horoscope, then you can work through his system and really get more comfortable with it than you may be at this time. And that will give you some clues of how you can add the Saturnine flavor to your rituals without, destroying anything you're doing. I mean, because it does mean command and control. It means you're going to be careful. It means you're probably going to be more precise and you're going to be more exacting. And that's okay. That's who you are. And there's nothing that's ever going to change that. So that's the energy you bring to the ritual. And the more you get familiar with the ritual work of using Saturn, and I would recommend taking a look at this book, the better you'll be able to move that Saturn into your ritual practice.
Thank you for the book recommendation. I'll definitely be picking it up. I mean, I've done some planetary magic myself and pulled off some really useful results. something that I think has really helped me a lot is consulting with an astrologer ahead of time and getting a sense as to the planetary cycles, like what's happening when. Um, is that something that you recommend to somebody who, they may read the book, but they also might want to work with somebody like yourself who could help them, be aware of those cycles and optimize them for their magical work?
I'm sure. I don't offer that right now because I'm actually even I mean, I'm a practicing magician to the fact that I wear an emerald ring and I wear the talisman. I'm not an actively practicing, ritual magician. Although the fact that I'm using astrology all the day makes me somewhat of a magician, depending on how you define the term. I would, um, there are groups of people that do astrological magic. I would recommend, Christopher Warnock. He doesn't have time for a lot of things right now, but he can point you to some of his students that have gone through his courses. And you can also search astrological magic. Just be sure when you search on somebody, just understand the lineage of their teachers and make sure they're not just, if they don't like say who they've studied with and what their path has been, I would not engage that person. You need to understand where they've come from and the studies that they've undertaken before, really working with somebody like that. But yes, absolutely, you can consult with somebody, and can help you along and speed the process.
Thank you for that. So I want to, first of all, thank you for your time because and respect it. I want to ask you two more questions. First question is, where can people find you on the web here?
Okay, the URL, it is a Substack, but I have my original URL, which I created way back in 2007. It's www.regulus. I'll spell in a second. Regulus-astrology.com. So that's REGULUS and a dash, not an underscore, a dash. ASTROLOGY.com. And that will take you to my Substack. If you're visiting that first time, it will ask you if you want to sign up for a newsletter. You don't actually have to. You can read most of the content for free. Some of the content is behind a paywall, but the majority of it is free. And for those of you who are interested in really learning about how the moon plays out in an individual's life, um, every Wednesday comes up a new entry of the natal database, and I walk you through that. It's a very it's granular data, but it shows you really how it's playing out in individual people's lives.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And finally, a question I ask all my guests is, if you can share with us a final word or phrase of wisdom, something that we can carry with us forward into the day.
I think to be in the moment is important. Let's say you have a ritual planned and you want to let's say it's a love ritual because today is Friday, Venus's day, and you're about to perform the ritual, but something falls in the room and breaks. Okay, or you hear screaming outside from your neighbor's house, or you have a loud car, you know, run its carburetor right by your house. Probably not the exact moment you want to conduct a Venus ritual. No matter if you have your altar set up, you have everything set up. So don't be stupid. Be in the moment. Okay. And it has to, bottom line, your gut check. Does this feel right? Does this feel like the exact moment to be doing this? Because if you have a lot of countervailing influences, out of your control, those will inhibit the ritual work that you're doing.
Mm. Oh, that's wise advice. I agree with that too. I mean, there is something to be said for just reading the moment, reading what's going on around you, paying attention to that, because that's influence and energy. That's attention. That all that different stuff can factor in and influence your magical working. So I think that's absolutely a great way to put it. Well, Dr. H, I want to thank you for coming on here, and I want to thank everyone who joined us live. Thank you for the questions and comments. And this interview will be going up momentarily in a little while here. So you'll get to watch it again and view it. So feel free to drop any comments or questions there as well. And again, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. H.
Thanks, Taylor. Have a great day.
You too.